Okay, let's start. I would like to warmly welcome you to our workshop on integrating land, sea and society into maritime spatial planning. We are here to talk about economic and social impacts and land-sea interactions. My name is Heini Ahtiainen and I work as a project coordinator at Helcom. The aim of this workshop is to share insights from the Pan-Baltic Scope project, where we've done quite a lot of work on the interaction between the sea and society, and also between sea and land, to support coastal and maritime spatial planning. Okay, we discussed why we need economic and social analyses for maritime spatial planning and land-sea interactions perspective for MSP, and what we need to do better to incorporate those aspects into planning. And we share experiences from the Pan-Baltic Scope project and Baltic Sea region, and also beyond. So the structure of this workshop is that we first have two presentations. First one on economic and social analysis, and the second on land-sea interactions, and that's actually given by 3 different people. Then we have invited reflections on the presentations and topics of this workshop, and we will after that convene a panel to discuss issues related to these aspects and analyses. We are also using Screen.io to engage the audience. So we are workshop number 7. You can go there. We will have, you can obviously see all the questions that are there and answer them whenever you like. We have now already 2 chat lines running throughout the session, and then we will have a couple of more specific questions later on in the panel. And the key messages from this workshop will be reported to plenary tomorrow. Okay. Here are the speakers in the session. I will start, and then 3 of my colleagues will continue with land-sea interactions, and they can also present themselves. And then we will have 4 panelists as well. They will be presented when we convene the panel. Okay, so let's start with assessing the impacts of maritime spatial planning on society. As I said, my name is Heini Ahtiainen. I'm from Helcom. And we've had a team of people from Helcom to take the most responsibility for this work. But we have also been supported by our colleagues in the Pan-Baltic Scope project, especially those doing work related to the ecosystem-based approach. So what I want to talk about are the assessment of economic, social, cultural, and ecosystem services impacts of MSP. And when I talk about economic and social analysis related to MSP, I mean all of these impacts. So we should here understand also this term economic very broadly, and also to capture all kinds of effects on human welfare. And one of our main aims has been to develop recommendations on how economic and social analyses could look at a regional level. And I will talk about those and finally present some take-home messages. The marine environment affects human well-being in many ways. We use the sea for many purposes, and it has a value to us. This slide shows example figures from the Helcom State of the Baltic Sea report, where we assessed, made a holistic assessment of ecosystem health of the Baltic Sea. And there we also assessed or made an analysis of different sea uses. Different activities, sea uses contribute to national economies. They provide income, revenue, and also employment. And when we think about the benefits of using the Baltic Sea, I do not mean only those kind of hard sectors and activities. for which we have statistics and we can estimate the gross value added. But I also mean, for example, marine and coastal recreation, which often happens locally, and the statistics to capture that aren't very good, but it still has an enormous economic value to citizens who live around the Baltic Sea. In addition to use of the marine environment, environmental status affects human well-being. And also that effect can be captured in monetary terms. So if the environmental state changes, we can assess what its value is. These are again example figures from HELCOM State of the Baltic Sea report on the potential monetary losses if we do not achieve the aim of the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive, good environmental status. You can again see that these are quite substantial figures. And not all effects or impacts to the marine environment can be monetized. People assign importance to different cultural ecosystem services, including things such as inspiration or spiritual meaning, identity that's related to the sea. And often it doesn't make sense, or it's very challenging to assess what the value of those is in quantitative or monetary terms. But they still have meaning to people and they're very important. We've just published a research paper on the importance of cultural ecosystem services in the Baltic Sea. And although these effects couldn't be captured in monetary terms, it's very important to identify and assess them as well. So that was sort of the background of, okay, MSP affects the use of the marine environment and the state, and that's why it's very important to capture those impacts. So what did we do in Pan-Baltic Scope project related to economic and social analysis? We reviewed recent literature on assessing these impacts and also made a survey to planners and others in the Baltic Sea region on how these impacts are assessed in national or local MSP. And based on that and previous work on economic and social analysis in the Baltic Sea region, we made recommendations on how we could develop a regional framework for assessing these impacts in MSP. And we also had one additional task in our economic and social analysis activity, which was presented in a previous workshop on assessing cumulative impacts in MSP, this plan-wise for blue. So why should we assess economic, social, cultural, and ecosystem services impacts of MSP? First of all, it's needed to implement the ecosystem-based approach. So there, in addition to looking at the interlinkages within the ecosystem, we should also see how the marine ecosystem and the socio-economic system affect each other. And also to ensure the sustainable use of marine goods and services. We need to know these impacts. Also, the EU Maritime Spatial Planning Directive states that while making maritime spatial plans, economic, social, and environmental aspects should be considered, although it doesn't specify it any further how that should be done. But as MSP has various impacts, we should be able to capture, identify all of those and assess their importance to human welfare. And if we do so, it also improves the comparability of impacts from MSP. If some impacts are not assessed or they are perhaps not put into monetary terms, they may often receive less attention or be even ignored in planning. So it's important that we keep all of these impacts there when we make assessments and also try to assess them as much as possible quantitatively to ensure that they are actually taken into consideration in MSP. But there are definitely challenges. Based on the survey results from the Baltic Sea region, we identified that there's a lack of data, resources and expertise to do these kinds of impact assessments, so economic, social, cultural and ecosystem services impacts. Also, we found that the approaches and results across countries vary significantly, and that's likely due to that the EU directive, MSP directive, actually leaves quite a lot of room for interpretation on what kind of approaches and results are actually needed, although this aspect should be considered, but there's no further specification. And based on this, I think regional development work and also collaboration across countries on these topics would be very beneficial to take these impact assessments further. So what kind of questions could these economic and social analyses to support MSP answer, or how could these analyses support MSP? This slide presents 4 examples. First, we could look at the economic contribution from different CUCs to the economy and employment. So how the changes in state of the environment or ecosystem services affects human welfare. Also, we could reveal the relative importance of different CUCs and ecosystem services and compare the benefits and costs of alternative spatial plans. And as our aim was to develop a regional framework, we can see quite a lot of benefits to doing this regionally rather than everyone doing it by themselves. So obviously, I think for most topics in MSP, it's important and useful to enhance regional cooperation and coherence of approaches and outputs across countries. And also, if we do this at a regional level, we can aid national and local authorities. So even though it's a regional level, if it's designed well, it should be, we can support also national and local assessments. And overall, this would improve the consideration of these impacts in MSP, because based on the literature review and survey, we can see that there definitely are gaps in their consideration. And as these assessments seem to be developing and just starting, all countries are or have finalized their first maritime spatial plans. But now it seems to be a good time to develop these approaches regionally and then to support national and local work in the future, perhaps in the next rounds or when these plans are updated. And from previous work at HELCOM, we found that these regional level analyses are both feasible and useful. We developed these analyses and results for them for this State of the Baltic Sea report, second holistic assessment. Okay, let's move on to the recommendations on developing a regional framework for economic and social analysis in MSP. Okay, so these first ones are related to having an overarching integrated assessment. So we recommend to just include the assessment of these impacts in MSP. And also we find that it's very important to do integrated analysis and identify and assess the linkages between CUCs, pressures, state of the environment, ecosystem services and human welfare, so that we can see what the links there are. And it's important to build on existing work, so we don't have to start from scratch. There are approaches and frameworks available, so we should definitely build on those in the work, and actually improve the use of existing data to support MSP that's available. And there are many results which are not spatially explicit, so to support MSP, obviously we need spatial analysis, and that's very important. For these impacts, we need to develop both approaches, data, and results. Also, common indicators would be useful, so that we know what we mean by these aspects and can capture them in coherent way. And obviously, this regional cooperation, collaboration is very important. And how to do this in practice? So we need to work in international and interdisciplinary cooperation, engage stakeholders, and also target the specific needs of planners and policymakers so that the results and approaches developed are actually useful. And it's important to ensure continuation and institutional memory. So this should not be just project-based. We should have more continuous work on this. Okay, as I said, expertise and resources are lacking. There's a need for those. And also common terminology and understanding is important. And there are definitely synergies between MSP and other marine policies, for example, the MSFD. We should use those. And also, if we do regional level frameworks, the countries differ, so we need to ensure flexibility. Okay, finally, some take-home messages. Maritime spatial planning has various impacts on economic, social, cultural, and ecosystem services aspects, and they should be identified, quantified, valued when possible to account for effects on human well-being. And this regional development work should be designed so that it can benefit also national and local authorities. Okay, we have a leaflet on the recommendations on the table. You can pick one up while you go out. Also, the recommendations, a short document on the recommendations with background and a little bit more detailed recommendations are available on the project website. And the background report on the literature review and survey result is coming soon. Thank you. I think we could take clarifying questions, if there are any at this point, from the audience, just old-fashioned way.
Who wants the microphone? Nobody? No comments to Heini? Mm-hmm. Everything right? Or too complicated? Or just after lunch or a late afternoon session? In that case, I actually have a question. I would like to think about what have you so far been thinking about how this connects to the land and the land-sea interactions? I know that it has not been part of our project. Do you have any kind of...
Well, obviously people who are affected by MSP live on land, mainly. So that's a clear and concrete connection point. But obviously, I think this is also one way to look at land-sea interactions. So we are looking, economic and social analyses are for looking at it both ways. So how humans affect the sea, what kind of pressures they create, how that affects the state of the sea, and also the other way around, how the state and use of the Baltic Sea or the sea affects humans. Mm-hmm. So definitely we cross the land-sea border also in these analyses.
And what do you think? Because I realized that we have like slightly different view about what is regional. I'm coming from a political science context, and here we talk about the regional level that is actually not necessarily transnational regional level, but there's also a governance level between the national and the local level, where there might be some planning happening, as for instance in Finland. And here it is very easy to confuse regional and regional.
Yes, well, yeah, coming from HELCOM, when we think about regional, then we talk about the Baltic Sea wide perspective and all the countries surrounding the Baltic Sea, so the 9 countries. So it's this international perspective.
Mm-hmm. And do you think HELCOM will start thinking a little bit more local now that Finland is also in the MSP? And you're localized in...
That's a good question. I think we should do both. Obviously, we need to capture the international aspect and that perspective, because that's what HELCOM is for. but we also need to balance so that we don't forget about these more local impacts and take that into consideration as well. So both are definitely important.
Yeah. Is there anyone in the audience? I have 2 minutes left for a short question, comment. Yes, I see a hand here. Please.
Yes, hello. My name is Henrik. I'm from Sweden, a consultancy firm called Analyses and MSP. You said that you hadn't been able to monetize the value of ecosystem services. I saw that you had used, for instance, travel cost method for other services or production values. But I know for a fact that Finland just did a stated preference valuation study, and we're doing one right now in Sweden.
Yeah, I was involved in that study, so perhaps I wasn't clear in my presentation. So yes, you definitely can value ecosystem services depending on which services those are. But I was referring to those kinds of services which are less intangible, for example, spiritual meaning, identity related to the sea, for example, that perhaps those kinds of ecosystem services are not easy to value, or it doesn't even make sense. But definitely
exactly, that's what you do with stated preference methods, and we have been able to put monetized values on each cultural service in our study, and I think that you have the data in the Finnish study as well to do that.
Monetary value.
Yeah.
That's
Stated preference methods.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, Germany is next. They're starting next year.
Yeah, so we've been assessing, at least in our study, we assessed the relative importance of those, but we didn't put monetary values to them because we thought that being too heroic or having to make perhaps too many assumptions. So we did it that way as a assessment of their importance, but we didn't put monetary values to them. That was our approach.
Okay, thank you very much, Heidi. I'm clapping my hands to you. And now I'm, so to say, switching roles and switching hats. You get that microphone. And I would like to call two of my eminent colleagues to the scene, Margarita and Mari, because we are now going to have a presentation together about integrating land-sea interactions into marine spatial planning. Please come up. So I welcome you here to the scene. I will hold a short introduction, and then I will just give the two of you who are representing two parts of the case studies in the work package, land-sea interactions in Baltic scope, from the Riga Bay case and from the FIAX essay, or the Bothnian Gulf case, to present some parts of your work and how this is related to land-sea interactions. And we actually see quite a lot of connections to what Heini has been doing. But it's, of course, it's a little bit at a higher level, maybe except for the Bothnian Gulf as a geographical frame. And if we think land-sea interactions, we actually need to think both ways. Oh yeah, that's good, thank you. But you turn it on when you need it. I will be running around a bit. So, yes. What is land-sea interactions? Should we think more about land-sea interaction? Well, the European Union wants us to. And the European Union also has this directive, but it paid a little bit of money to the Pan-Baltic Scope and other projects to actually start thinking about it a bit more consistently, a bit more formally, a bit more concretely. But because we have these different countries at very different stages of institutional development, when we had the initial scoping for our project, it was kind of difficult to find a common agreement. What is it actually that we want to work with? And do we have any countries and any partners who want to work with land-sea interactions? So in the end, we ended up with Finland, Åland, and with Latvia and Estonia, and to a certain extent, Sweden, at a very higher abstraction level to actually deal with land-sea interactions. Okay, and how did we do this? In the scoping phase, we were really kind of confused because, I mean, there was not much literature available actually about land-sea interactions. The term was not really known. It was actually the European Union that had more or less coined it. So there was like this report here, Land Sea Interactions in Maritime Spatial Planning, and some other things, but very little research. Our intern, Sara Mahadeo, who did a study as a part of her master's thesis of 270-ish articles and reports, realized that there's two different discourses, a polydiscourse and a scientific one, and they're not really agreeing, and it is sort of necessary to actually create some kind of order. And at the same time, and now we have somebody eminent in the public and then in the panel who will actually comment that, there was this ESPON project running with both Holger Janssen and Sue Kidd as important parts in that project, and we are so happy to have you here later on to also comment on this. So we are, so to say, we're running like in parallel, trying to sometimes play a little bit a ball to each other, and this is some information, this is our report, and yeah, now we're here and trying to do it for another time. So, and in order to do this, actually, we need to work, we needed to have this kind of a framework. And we needed to decide on what kinds of case studies we have. So we have Finland, Holland, Sweden, and we have Latvia and Estonia. And we started working. And after this, before we could start working, we had to have some kind of order in our heads. And this is like this four-dimensional framework that we have been now using in the project. So on one hand, the first part is the actual uses and interactions in the environment and society. The second part is the governance frameworks, and we will hear a little bit more about the governance frameworks and the land sea interactions from you, Margarita, and how to deal with the different levels. We have the processes dimension, because Finland, Åland said, oh, we need to work with the stakeholders, it's very important, so we really need to activate this. And then everybody's saying, oh, what do we actually know? What kinds of methods do we need? So that would be the fourth dimension. And all this belongs together into some kind of an arrow, a land-sea planning continuum, and you call it one space, but we're talking about the same thing. So this is one of our balls that we're playing to each other. So we have a green arrow, or green-blue, blue-green arrow, and we have the red arrow of management. And now I would like to, Mari, to invite you to present a bit more about what you have been doing in Finland to talk about these arrows. So please go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Andrea. I will shortly present you the LSI issues in a very pragmatic way, what we have done in Finland. Not so much about the FIACSE process that Andrea was referring to. But I need to show you this infograph because in Finland the planning process differs a lot from the other countries' approaches. That is that we have actually 8 regional councils that are responsible for drafting and adopting and implementing the MS plans. That means that we don't have the national authority or national agency responsible for that. What it means in practice is that we have very skilled planners that have long experience in land use planning that are now responsible of this very new issue, MSP. And that means that we are really close to the regional and local level stakeholders. And we have a good understanding of the regional goals and aims and blue growth objectives and all that stuff. And also wanted to show you the figure of our planning process. You can see that the maritime spatial planning starts from the shoreline and ends to the EEZ. And it overlaps with the MSP itself is not binding, legally binding. It's just strategic plan that guides unofficially, so to say. But then we have the legal process, the land use planning that covers also the territorial waters. And these are actually the same guys, same planners that are doing the MSP and the land use planning for territorial seas. And so they have to discuss with each other in a way. It's harder to disagree with yourself in a way. We are in the middle of the process. This is our first planning process. This is our first time ever. After trying to figure out the current state of the different elements of what we need to know in order to make a coherent plan, we moved towards the scenario work. Yesterday you had a brief introduction to this team. I won't go into that, but it was not about forecasting. It was not about how to find the most likely future, but it was what might happen almost in the worst scenario, and how to prepare ourselves to that, and what is the impacts, what we need to know MSP-wise, how we have to prepare to that. And we did this with stakeholders in a very intensive stakeholder dialogue. We have this saying that we plan with stakeholders for stakeholders, because that is how we do. It's our 3 plans, 8 regional councils. And now after the scenario work, we move towards the vision work. At the moment, we are setting the vision for our sea areas, and we are doing it together with the stakeholders. And during this particle time, I want to show you this 3D figure we have presented to the stakeholders. Actually, just printed papers and then pens and post-its. And we wanted to kind of, when we come to the actual LSI issues, is that it's not about defining the term. Andrea and Nordreki, they have done excellent work defining the term. And in Finland, it's more about the process, how to engage stakeholders in the work so that we have the common understanding what the LSI issues are, how to have planners of understanding that we have these established sea users and whatever happens in the sea, and now we have new term and what it, in practice, what it means. And we showed these figures and asked stakeholders to define different interactions between land and sea. We didn't use the term land and sea as itself. And we found out that there was a lot of interactions between marine users and the land users. It's like ecological connections, you know, the nutrient flow that affects on anything that you do in the sea areas, or we had a need for free ways for like salmon or salmon trout to go and spawn in the rivers and that kind of stuff. And then we found out the interactions between the institutions, like whatever needs to be built to have an access to the sea and so on. So actually the stakeholders are defining us, what the LSI is. Of course, planners have their understanding, but it's good to have a common understanding anyway. But when it comes to the Pan-Baltic Scope project, we had resources. 2 years we had extra resources to do something extra. And one of those regional councils, Regional Council of Satakunta, and you can see a heat map head of the coastal area of the Satakunta area and Åland Islands. We collected data from the wider public. It was open questionnaire in the web, and we got excellent response rate, I'd say. And we asked about the meaningful places, the sea or coastal area. We asked whether you have meaningful places for your leisure time or livelihood, whether you had strong emotions towards some places or processes on the sea or the coastal area, and whether you find any nature cultural values, and also the conflicting places. We asked whether you know anything conflicting interests and so on, and why is the situation that. And then the important process was to kind of find ways to interpreting the data. Of course, the spatial and temporal things, that is essential, and for who this is meaningful place for stakeholder-wise, sex and age, all that stuff. And then when? Is it summer, is it winter? Do they have the conflict of interest, different actors and so on? But in MSP-wise, what is needed to maintain it? We have to know where it happens in order to avoid conflicting the situation. And if we can't avoid that, then we at least know when we are conflicting the situation. I will show you another map. What we noticed then that actually we can also see some LSI issues from this same data. This is something we are doing at this moment. This is actually really local level knowledge. And this complements in a way the regional and national level stakeholder data. And then when we look at because people have the possibility to explain why this place is meaningful to them, a lot of emotional things, social things, that Heini just explained, the same issues came from this data. And this is something we are doing now, how we can see the LSI issues from these explanations. So this was basically what I had to say. Thank you.
Margarita. Thank you.
Labdien, everyone. My name is Margarita. I represent Latvian Ministry of Environmental Protection and Regional Development, Special Planning Department. We are responsible actually for doing the Latvian MSP, National Maritime Special Plan. In our case, we collaborated with our colleagues from Estonian Ministry of Finance, so I'm speaking also on their behalf. I will start already with the context that you already heard yesterday that Latvian MSP is adopted this year, and the Estonian is just on the way. And when we started, it was still in process, and already you know from your own experience in different fields and backgrounds that countries are really different and legal frameworks are different, same but different, and planning systems and traditions and are different. So what was actually the trigger for our common case that we felt that we need to look how actually the MSP is can be translated by local municipalities. How can it be translated by local municipalities? And the thing is that in Latvian case, we have overlap of spatial plans, meaning that maritime spatial plans starts from a coastline and goes to the border. And in Estonia, actually, they don't, and it overlaps with the spatial plans, with the territorial plans of municipalities. And in Estonia, we don't have this overlap of plans, but still, as they are very active in their maritime spatial plan process, so we wanted also to know should the municipalities have any role in MSP in planning the marine waters. So I thank you, Andrea, for this picture of lakes standing next to the wave, because actually that's what we did in our case. We decided to step into the sea, and how we did that by 3 main actions, like thinking, drawing, and talking. Speaking of thinking, that we mean that we actually send a short but questionnaire to Estonian and Latvian coastal municipalities. You can see 5 questions, in which way could be specific or more like on a fantasy level, like asking if they have plan or already do something in the marine or coastal area, or what are they like expectations and needs. And you can imagine that we interviewed 25 coastal municipalities from Estonia and 17 from Latvia, and we received all the spectrum of answers. But that was good, because that's actually what we wanted when we decided for our second action with drawing. We actually invited representatives of local municipalities and planners to come together and to create, among other discussions and things, we actually invited them to create, to draw, to sketch the municipal, on a local level, the plan for the marine areas. And you can see 2 results, because we had 2 groups for Latvian and Estonian spatial planners. So I will just tell shortly that here you can see it's like a river mouth, and that's the sea, and you can see artificial islands here. Actually, these are like artificial islands for nature conservation. You can see the mariculture, and this is the shoreline, and then some sports, fisheries, and also some energy and nature reserve. I don't know how many Latvians or Estonians are in the room, but maybe you can try to guess, at least for yourself, which one was done by Latvian planners and which one was for Estonian planners. Okay, so to your left is the Latvian planners, and to the right are Estonians. Someone from Latvia could have guessed that, because first that we started were artificial islands, because we don't have any island in the sea. So, but that of course was done just as a bit maybe I don't know, simple exercise, but what we wanted for planners to start thinking about how can we actually use the marine waters, what are the needs, and not think from the perspective what we can actually do already by the legal frameworks or whatever. So, and in these discussions, actually, some very, I think we earlier today had these specific discussions on some, if the specific local things should be really crucial for the Maritime Spatial Plan. But what I wanted to emphasize that in these kind of discussions, some really, really, I don't know, valuable things are brought up, and I think they really should stay, at least at local municipal level. For example, that value, what is really specific for Latvia and Estonia, value of unbuilt and very close to natural landscape, coastal landscapes, that value should be safeguarded, and that's a big asset for local communities and local municipalities. And for example, that planners agree that although ownership is like a big place, like who's owning what kind of territory, is it marine, is it coastal, is it the beach or next to, is important because they speak from their experience with planning issues on the terrestrial sites. But somehow we agree that in marine waters and on a coastal area, many things are really temporal, happening in different times and different seasons, and maybe this ownership is not so important. It's more like a level of management and agreements. I'm trying to speed up. So main findings and takeaways. Yeah, maybe they are obvious, but still, these are coming from the planners of Estonia and Latvia. That of course, planning for the municipality should not stop at the coastline, and what was also emphasized that the communication between different kind of stakeholders, because we have also a big experience working with stakeholders on terrestrial spatial planning. It's not a big challenge, but the real challenge sometimes is for planners to get the knowledge and the arguments and lift them and take a political decision on an action or on plans. And at the moment, of course, the institutional capacity and specific knowledge at the local level is limited, but that was somehow summed up by the idea that probably if some real issue or some real initiative will come, then it will mobilize the needs and for municipality really to react and to act. And I still have 30 seconds. Then results will be available on the Pan-Baltic Scope webpage. And actually what we did for Latvia, when we worked together in our case, that we conducted a pilot thematic plan for the one municipality, Salacgrīva, because we wanted to see actually what are the tools already for Latvian municipalities available in dealing with different issues in coastal area, including water, marine waters, and we also conducted guidelines for the whole municipality, all municipalities in Latvia. So that will be summaries of those documents also will be available, and the thematic plan looks like this. You can find the summary next to our stand, next to Latvian MSP stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margarita. We're not really done yet. Stay tuned for the end, because I'd just like to wrap this up a little bit from a land sea interactions perspective. You have now seen how this looks in reality, in planning reality, and we have gone all the way from the detail to the more and more larger scale. And you can also find a fee access story map where there's a lot of stuff, and here we have just seen the guidelines, and I want to lift this in here that we have created, and you can get this also at Norregio stand. There is so far, it's just a draft report, and this contains both the framework, the challenges and enablers that we have condensed from both cases, and recommendations. And I just want to shortly show you what kind of recommendations we have. On one hand, like the awareness of what it's there and how you should be aware of it. On the other hand, also about scale, because scale is key, as we have seen with the land-sea interactions combinations, economic and social analysis, that you need to think about process and institutions, and you need the resources. I just remember the last session in the morning, number 2, about participation, and the thing where I see most of a link between ESA, economic and social analysis, and what we have been doing in our work package is the knowledge and shareable and reliable knowledge, including maps and the scale issue that I think would be really nice to continue discussing, and how can we do these methods. So yeah, stay tuned for our results. You can get the reports. And yeah, thank you very much. And yes, just the last word. Suzanne, I think maybe somebody of you remember the movie.
Oh,
with
yeah.
Tom Cruise.
That was my reflection, yeah.
So please, you want to say something about that?
Well, no, but I thought MSP looks at, take the next one, MSP looks at, you know, her, looks at LSI and ESA like, you complete me.
You had me at my first.
Hello! Yes,
I haven't
know.
seen the movie, so I missed my key.
Yes,
I'm
you
sorry
did.
for that.
It was like, oh, how do we look at ESA and LSI? Well, it's a part of it. It completes it. Ah, said my brain. So, I'm going to say hello now, and I'm Susanne Gustafsson. I am the specially called-in moderator for this panel discussion, because two of the panelists, you know, are the moderators. So to avoid that, here I am. And yeah, we can start by looking a bit at the Screen IO questions that you have been answering. We asked you questions early on, and it said, well, I see now that I'm presented like that, and this is true. But before that, I was working with the Swedish MSP, also with the FIAXE in the Pan-Baltic Scope project. So that's why I'm here.
Suzanne?
Yes.
I just thought maybe those two people are getting a little bit tired. So should we want to release them, or do you want to make
Yeah. Would you want to sit on stage
already here, so
right away, or do you want to go sit down there and come up? Come sit here, please, my friends. Please have a nice seat. And then also Andrea and where are you, Heini?
And then should we?
All the speakers. Well, I'm going to continue now with the Screen IO, because we ask you questions. What are important land-sea interaction perspectives to include in MSP? To start with, and see, you've been voting, you've been adding different perspectives, and then you have been voting, and it's very close. It's a close race, but especially I'm impressed by so many alternatives, so many suggestions. You can keep adding. I should tell you, this will be the final results, part of the final results from this workshop. Right now it's ensure MSP is aligned with other national policies, maritime transport, energy policy, conservation policy, and so on, I guess. This feels very straightforward. Also cable routes, grid connections for offshore renewables, very important. Oh, and this is a long one. Ensuring institutional connection between planning for the sea and for land, minimizing mismatches between different plans for prioritizations, as well as connecting people and less organize the stakeholders with marine planning. Yeah, that's important. And the other question we asked you was, what is needed to better integrate social and economic aspects into MSP? And there we have a strong leader right now. It says, better connection between land-based databases and MSP databases, as well as finding ways of integrating qualitative data. Yeah, this is something that is important for us. And then ecosystem services monetized. Ooh, we've been waiting for that one. And joint race with local level and scientific-based data. Yeah, so that's the way it looks now. If you want to change it, vote, go to Screen IO, workshop 7, and you can do that. But right now, I would like to, you can have a seat, Andrea.
I'm not sitting because I
Oh, you don't want, oh, there's no chairs.
Or maybe.
Yeah, there is. There is
There
now.
is. Okay, I go and sit. You
Yeah,
stand.
yeah, you're part of the panel, you know. Oh, maybe not exactly there, in front of me. Sorry, 'cause I think this is mine. Anyway, so Holger, Dr. Holger Jansen from is responsible for coastal spatial plans in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Germany. We have Christine Pakalniete, if I can say that correctly. You're an expert on socioeconomic analysis of MSP and in the Baltic Sea, many areas. Marina Markovic, there you are. You are coordinator of MSP in the Adriatic, you know, the Eastern Mediterranean. Sorry.
This is why I said I'm going to run around.
Okay.
That's fine. I love to stand. No,
What?
I love to stand. That's fine. Please take a seat. I don't know. I don't want to.
Please have a seat. We'll manage to do this. No chairs, too many chairs, too few chairs. We'll do it. And then we have Sue Kidd from the Liverpool University, expert on land and sea interaction. Welcome to all of you. And yeah, let's start by the new people and hear a little bit from you that we don't know yet. Should we start with Holger? Could you maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and you know, how you feel about these topics we are talking about today? Oh, yeah. It should be on. It has been all day. Maybe it died.
Which is always a good sign.
Yeah, there we go.
Could be a blue light either. Yeah, I'm one of those very few persons. Mario, how did you phrase that? For whom it's difficult to disagree with myself. In my case, we do terrestrial planning and MSP in one combined process. So I found that very interesting, what you presented. My background is I'm a special planner by education. I worked for many years in science, and now I'm responsible for doing what I was writing about in my past. Yeah, when I heard your very nice talks, there were many thoughts going through my brain. One was that, for whom are we doing MSP? Is it for the sake of the sea or for the sake of the land? My feeling was that in many cases it's mainly maybe for the sake of the land. This is why we're talking about land-sea interactions.
Yes.
Maybe. On the other hand, if you put that vice versa, Heine, you presented this issue of beautification in your first or second slide. And I thought maybe this is, well, that's a land-sea interaction the other way around. And if that is the case, what is then the role of MSP in improving our environment? Is there any room left for doing that? My feeling was maybe there's very little room left. So that is also something which is linked to the issue of ecosystem services and the idea of putting monetary value to them. I'm not so sure whether this is really helpful in our debate. I was quite impressed by those numbers that you've shown us. 3 or 4 billion euros, this is a lot. At the same time, this is on a very high level of abstraction somehow. What has that to do with my own life? Is that really important for me? Where's the emotion behind those numbers? Maybe this is not about value, it's about the weight that we put on these issues. My personal weight, my own values that I have, but not monetary values maybe. So many questions that I had. Let's see what others have maybe.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I would like to also hear a little bit from our next panelist, which is Christine. If you could tell me a little bit about you and your thoughts of the question of today.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. I'm economist and I'm head of the private company and dealing with economic research and consultancy for water and biodiversity protection. And I have long experience in developing economic and social analysis to support national and Baltic Sea region policies. So I'm representing the same community of economic and social analysis as HEINI. And I found also that when preparing for these discussions, I found my messages are quite similar to what was presented by HEINI. But yeah, I will explain a bit them later. So, and also just to note that as part of the ongoing work, we are working in Latvia on valuation and spatial assessment of benefits from ecosystem services provided by the marine benthic habitats, and assessment of welfare impacts of establishing marine protected areas, and also alternative sea use scenarios to support maritime spatial planning. And for the introduction, I would like maybe to make two reflections on the workshop topics. The first is related to the interactions between the marine environment and socioeconomic systems, what these interactions are and how economic and social analysis support these interactions. So actually these interactions were already introduced by in the presentations. I would also name as the main elements of these interactions is that the benefits derived from the sea, the impacts from the sea use on the marine environment and on other sea uses, and also how these impacts affect back human welfare due to changes in the marine environment. And to my understanding, MSP actually is interested to optimize these interactions. And I see that economic and social analysis can support these, can do at least two things. And I would formulate them as the first thing is that economic and social analysis can clearly assess the benefits from the sea use, or we can say contribution of the sea to human welfare. And it can be in terms of the benefits from ecosystem services or benefits to economy in terms of added value and employment, but we should be aware that these are very diverse socioeconomic values which comes from the sea, and as I mentioned by HEINI, we can apply various methods, monetary, quantitative indicators, or qualitative. But I would argue that I see the importance also of monetary evaluation, because it gives a common measurement for various these values, also with limitations, but still to indicate the range of values involved in the MSP. And and second thing is that I believe that economic and social analysis can really help assessing the various impacts of the alternative CU scenarios or planning options, because each scenario has own costs and benefits, and we can assess and compare them to support more effective decision making on effective alternatives. And that's on how ESA can at least support the MSP and this work. And the second is, my second reflection is related to link between the ESA and land-sea interactions. I would say that there are a few dimensions of these interactions. One is this environmental or physical interaction dimension of these land-sea interactions. I would formulate the economic and social analysis is a socio-economic dimension of the land-sea interactions, because as HEINI mentioned, the beneficiaries are located on the land, and if we can show the maps of where the ecosystem services are produced, where where they are consumed and benefits derived, and where the beneficiaries are located. Actually, we have various maps of the sea, coastal, and land-based, because beneficiaries are largely based on land. And by assessing and showing and demonstrating all these elements, actually we show the socioeconomic dimension of the land-sea interactions.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for Marina to tell me a little bit about yourself and your initial thoughts about this workshop, the topics of today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. So my name is Marina Markovic. I'm coming from Paprag. This is one of the regional centers of the UN Environment Program Mediterranean Action Plan. So practically we are based in the Mediterranean, and we are the center with the mandate to do the integrated coastal zone management, of course, including the marine spatial planning. So the first, I think it's quite important and relevant that these two topics, land sea interactions and economic and social assessments, are actually part of the same workshop, because I think one cannot do without the other. Just the thought of Croatia when we were doing, we are based in Croatia, so this is why I often use some examples. So in Croatia, when we were doing, not we, but Croatia was doing the environmental and social assessment for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, actually we were addressing the land, not just the sea part, because you cannot do it without assessing the sea. I think in the first presentation, I think it was quite important to address the value and the importance of addressing the monetary values of activities, also even of the social impact. I think it's quite important. It's important to also address even the monetary value of having the marine spatial plan, because all these days we are speaking about MSP as if this is something natural to do. However, I would say that this is quite natural at the moment and important within the EU. But I think there are a number of countries, of course, outside the EU that actually don't have the legal mandate to do it. Coming from the Mediterranean, this is particularly true. Of course, we have part of the Med where there are EU countries, but there's part of the Mediterranean where they are not part of the EU, so they don't have the mandate to do marine spatial planning. But there was also an additional aspect mentioned, that when doing the social and economic assessment is about integrated analysis of the ecosystems and the socioeconomic system. So here practically what we are talking about is the ICZM, Integrated Coastal Zone Management, and this is what we do in the Mediterranean, so for the past 30 plus years. And this is the source, let's say, of the legal aspect, I would say, in the Mediterranean to do marine spatial planning, because I don't know if you know, but as part of the Mediterranean we have, I don't know if still it's the only one, no, I think it's not, but it was definitively the first international legal document on coastal zone management. So inside this document that was adopted in 2008 and it was in force in 2011, we are speaking about coastal zone, but coastal zone, not just the land part. For us, the coast is the land and the sea. So sometimes in the Mediterranean it's confusing, land-sea interactions. I mean, what is this? Now, we have been talking about ICZM for years, for decades, and now all of a sudden a new term. But also inside of this document, in this ICZM protocol, this legal document that we have, we are speaking about planning the coastal zone. So it's not just planning the land part, but also planning the sea. And this is where we have our mandate to speak in the Mediterranean about this important concept. But however, since part of the Mediterranean countries are part of the EU, and now this concept of land-sea interactions emerged, we wanted to address that as well on top of the ICZM concept that we always use. So speaking with the planners, it was very clear and obvious that we don't need to produce something very complicated, because I think there is a tendency to overcomplicate things. And now to address, I mean, of course we have to address everything in the integrated manner, but I think it's important to present it in the simplified manner. So in order to do it, we developed, as part of the UNEP map participation in SimWestMed and Supreme project, we addressed sort of a guidelines on how the planners should take these land-sea interactions into consideration by some step-by-step approach. We tried to develop a little bit easy tool how to do it. And we tried to test it in few of the countries. So, for example, in Croatia, I think it was quite easy because Croatia also has a planning tradition where we are not planning just the land part, but also as part of the spatial planning, we are planning the sea as well. So I think it was already embedded in the system. Malta also did it, and for Maltese planners, this idea of what are we doing now? I mean, we have been doing a lot of ICZM, so how do we approach this differently? But okay, I will not go into details of it. I can tell you that it was quite interesting, and I think land-sea interactions not only can, but have to be addressed as part of the planning system, but also really try to do it in a quite simplified manner, because also in the beginning what has been addressed that we need to target needs of policymakers, but also planners, because planners are those doing the plan. So we really need to do everything tailor-made to them. So sorry if I take too much time. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. And now we have Sue Kidd, from one Sue to another. Yeah, you had another one, thank you.
Hello.
I'm going to
yes,
go back.
Yes. Well, I'm Sue Kidd. I'm from the University of Liverpool, and I feel as though there was a compliment made about describing me as an expert in land-sea interactions. I feel as though I would not describe myself as that. I'm somebody very much on the learning curve of trying to get to grips with land-sea interactions. I am a land-based planner by my origins, but before I joined the university, I worked for coastal planning authorities dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. Subsequently, my work has gradually stepped into the sea, and I've been very fortunate in recent times to do a whole series of projects on land-sea interactions. Firstly, with the MSP platform, we produced the guide, the initial thoughts on land-sea interactions. More recently, working with Holger and others, we've been doing an SBOM project on MSP and land-sea interactions, looking particularly at using value chain analysis as a way of understanding economic sectors and the land-sea interactions. And I'm currently working with Hannah Jones, who's somewhere in the room, and we're carrying on the work as part of the Sim Atlantic project, which is a new project that we are just beginning to engage in. So I'm very pleased to be able to take forward all the work, including this work in the Baltic Sea, to reflect on the Supreme work and others. There's been lots of things going on in recent times that I think we can all learn from. Quite a lot of things in parallel, so I think we've been doing things in our own little sort of compartments, and I think now is an opportunity to learn across what we've been doing. But obviously the issue of impact assessment is something that is closely connected to understanding land-sea interactions. And I think hearing the presentation from Heini this afternoon, it resonated with something that came out in the ecosystem-based approach seminar, and particularly the work that was done by the MSP platform on the ecosystem-based approach. And one of the things that came out there was that there was a whole series of tools that can be used to carry forward the ideas of the ecosystem-based approach. And I think that's true of land-sea interactions as well. Because I think there's all sorts of different reasons why you might want to look at land-sea interactions. There's things about justifying why MSP might be a worthwhile activity because it's connected to so much sort of economic value. But I think there's, I think the more I've gone into it, the more I have begun to appreciate the need for all sorts of different tools. There isn't there's a silver bullet was another sort of a term that's come up several times. There isn't a silver bullet. And there's all sorts of different approaches. I think there are many people, and politicians might be one of those groups, who like the economic valuations because they like simple figures. But from a planning perspective, standing up in a public inquiry, the question marks about the valuation of particularly things like cultural services and things like that are likely to come back to you. So although they've got a distinct role, I think we have to accept that many of the issues to do with land-sea interactions are complex. They are extremely difficult to get a handle on. And that's where the qualitative approaches that I was very pleased to see has been a feature of the work that Andrea and her team have been doing. Because I really do believe that one way to cut through some of those difficulties is to value these more qualitative approaches to data gathering and analysis, and not to and to embrace those as part of a suite of approaches.
Right, thank you. So we're going to move. We've talked now a little bit about where we are and a little bit about where we want to go, maybe. And I'm thinking we should move on to the future, and how do we get there? The ways forward. There are questions. I think we have a question on the screen IO, where we can choose the most important things. The pressing data and method needs for moving into the future with our MSP. Let's see if something happens on our screen. There it is. You've already started voting. This is brilliant. Well, so I want to ask somebody in the panel, maybe one of the people who are on first, have been sitting here for a while. Marie, maybe. What do you think is the most pressing data or method development need that is out there right now?
Good question, because for me, I see this in a way that first we have to have a common understanding about the collaborative governance as a term, how to adopt that before we start thinking about the data and the methods. Because nowadays we don't have a common understanding how to, like there is a, I think that we had in the screen IO that we have to integrate the local knowledge data and the expert data and the science and all that stuff. But we have to be, as Nico mentioned in his keynote in the morning, is that the key is the adaptive governance. That is the key, and we have to understand what it means. And it means that we have to value all levels of knowledge, and we have to kind of be transparent and open in our process, and well, whatever we do with the stakeholders, we have to have a common language in a way. We have to. It is so that the planners have to adopt the stakeholders' discourse, not another way around, and all that stuff. It's about the small steps, but towards the, so to say, win-win situation with the stakeholders. As you mentioned, who are we doing this planning for? It's for stakeholders, but it's also for the nature. So it's all the information, all levels of information, and after that, it's about the data and methods. I'd say that way. Maybe someone else would like to say what kind of methods we could. Yeah.
Margarita, have you, in your work, Latvia, Estonia, what was it you missed the most?
Maybe as I'm looking on the screen also, and I see that this special needs for marine uses, and how now and in the future, I think that would be for special planners maybe beneficial to understand actually how the different uses affect space. Data on that would be really interesting to see, because many marine uses coexisted for for centuries, I would say, and
Yeah.
so that would be very interesting. But I also agree with Marie about the work with stakeholders.
The results are no longer in order of most important, which is unfortunate. If we could get a fix on that, it would be great. Okay, so somebody else who felt, oh gosh, I know that data, I want that. Come on, Holger. What is it we need the most?
My feeling is that this will be a big friendship, maybe with Marie, because I have the same feeling that of course we, or I would have phrased it a bit different way. Margarita had on one of her first slides the question, how do we involve people, local people, in those processes? And on the one hand, we try to get all these numbers on the value of ecosystem services. We're talking about jobs that we get from blue growth and others, the value of MSP in contributing to all these ambitions. At the same time, when I go into those MSP processes, the feedback that I get from my local population on the marine part of what we're doing is pretty low in most cases. I've seen that if you have an archipelago, this helps. If not, then you go for artificial islands. That might also help. But it's a bit that of course, people have to understand what's the value of the sea, how they can interact with them. So I would like to have much more data that is spatially explicit, as Heini said earlier. We need spatial data. I want to have more knowledge on what are the most valuable marine areas that we have in ecological and economic terms. And therefore I'm missing a classification system like we have on land, something like the NUTS system or something similar. And I would have much more knowledge and much more maps on actually, this is where the value comes, this is where it goes, this is in for your own community, and then the next community in the neighborhood is benefiting from that, so that we really could have something like a spatio-economic analysis.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Well, yeah, please. Yes.
Yeah, from socioeconomic perspective, maybe I would note several issues for future work. I would support the comments and also presentation that we really need integrated frameworks allowing assessment both ecosystem service supply but also benefits and values, and because only by these integrated frameworks we can really demonstrate the impacts and outcomes of the changes due to various planning scenarios and options, and then we can assess and compare these impacts, and then we can make more optimal decisions and find that the best, most socioeconomic and effective alternatives. So, and integrated frameworks and integrated assessments is a precondition for that we could really model this. This is one. When it comes to assessment of the benefits and values, I would say these are really important, and we miss both data and assessments, at least in the Baltic Sea region, to be able to demonstrate really and to provide illustrations how they can support the MSP. And when we have these assessments, and in particular the spatial distribution of these assessments, because as I mentioned already, these are different maps because the ecosystem services are produced in the sea and they are consumed somewhere on coastline or in various locations, and the beneficiaries are located largely on the land. And these are really different maps. And what we need really to show and demonstrate these various maps, and that's how we show the socioeconomic dimension of the sea and land interactions. And if we can, and I would also, so far what we see that the most ecosystem service assessments, they are based on ecosystem supply or potential or accounting number of ecosystem services provided by each, let's say, area, I would clearly say that's not enough. We need to proceed with estimating values, because these values can show different importance and weights, and that's important gap. And I think that's for us economists important work for the future really, to work on these collecting data and developing estimates on these benefits and values and their spatial distribution, to come up with good illustrations to demonstrate how the economic and social analysis can really support maritime spatial planning. And since we miss these, then I think that's why we can maybe are not very far yet on integrating or incorporating the economic and social analysis in MSP. That's my really belief. And maybe adding on ecosystem services also, just a final thing on ecosystem services assessments. I think maybe what we still also miss a bit conceptual clarity, what is ecosystem service, what is benefit, what is value, because we need also proper indicators for each, because what we see in the current studies, there is sometimes mixing ecosystem services and benefits, and there are no really good indicators for values, and there are no assessments for these value indicators, and that's important future work for us. And the final one is arguing a bit on eutrophication. Is it really related to the maritime spatial planning? I would argue with an example, for instance, because there are sea uses which create physical pressures in the sea on benthic habitats, and if they affect benthic habitats, they reduce the capacity of these habitats to provide such important regulating services as nutrients assimilation, hazardous substances assimilation, and carbon sequestration, reducing these ecosystem services, so reducing also benefits of these services. And beneficiaries are different groups of society, and they live very far from the sea. And at the same time, socioeconomic studies, they really demonstrate that also those people who live very far from the sea, they attach value to the sea. That's so I would say that whole range of ecosystem services actually is involved and should be somehow captured and addressed in the maritime spatial planning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And one, you both get a quick remark. Our time is very fastly running out.
So just very quickly,
yes,
then.
please.
So maybe more on what data rather than what type of data. I think whatever data are used, they really need to be able to be spatialized, so really to be able to be used in MSP process. But I think when we speak with scientists on what data are needed, it's always, you need more data, this kind of data, that kind of data. We are often working, at least in the Mediterranean context, in countries where there's really few data, especially when we speak about the sea. And planning, and also marine spatial planning, is a tool for decision making. So being a decision-making tool, so this means you need to come up with a decision. And in data, I think it's also about applying the concept in such cases of daring to exclude. So I think we also need to dare maybe not to work with all the possible data that we can get or trying to add more data, but really try to work with what you have in order to come up with some decisions.
Okay, I very much concur with what you're saying, because I think the search for data is always going to be there, and it's needed, it'd be beneficial in time, but we've got to work with what we've got in a simple way. And I suppose my points are responding really to the method aspect of the question. And I think that what we really need to do is to develop our more qualitative approaches to data gathering and assessment, but also moving away from seeing this activity as a rather technical exercise that's rather, it's all about MSP. One of the things that I used to do quite a lot of work on SEA, an impact assessment, integrated impact assessment, and one of the projects that we worked on was really a dissatisfaction from me of many of those exercises as being highly technical exercises that you could tick the box and say, we've done that. And it was about developing the learning potential of SEA. And it's seeing these assessment processes that we're likely to have to incorporate with MSP as an opportunity for learning. And one of the things that we did in that SEA project was saying SEA is very much focused on single loop learning. It's a technical exercise that's related to a particular point in time and a particular plan. Whereas it's a lot of money, a lot of effort goes into these exercises, and we should be more ambitious about what we're trying to achieve. They have a potential, these exercises, to create double loop learning, both from an individual perspective, from an organisational perspective, and a social, societal perspective. And I think that one of the things that LSI or looking at social economic impacts in MSP can do is provide arenas for people to have conversations that they wouldn't be having in normal circumstances, that they will go way beyond a particular plan. It will influence MSP, but it will also create supportive action on the land and encourage people to be imaginative about how they respond. So there's a real opportunity here, I think, for MSP to play a very valuable role, societal role, in having those conversations.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan to me. Thank you. So this is now an opportunity for you guys. Does any one of you want to answer this question? What are the most pressing data or method development that is needed now to enable incorporation of economic and social impacts and LSI interactions into MSP? Anyone?
Or
Something
maybe
you want to reflect on from today?
You have already been voting a lot, so we are really thankful for all the good input here. So
yes, but maybe you want to formulate it yourself. No? Well, fine. Oh, you did? You got one? Did you? No?
I saw a hand up there, but maybe that was just somebody scratching nose.
Yeah, so thank you, the panel, for doing this with me and being here. And now over to the moderators again.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to thank all of you for participating. I think we would like to wrap up this session and say a couple of concluding remarks on behalf of me and Andrea as well. I think the discussion has been really interesting. What I've taken to me is that we should explore these linkages between LSI interactions and economic and social analysis more. Also, the need for this integrated assessment, that tools are already available. And then what I would see as important is that actually assessing these economic, social, cultural, and even ecosystem services impacts in MSP is a way to engage the public, the citizens, the locals, everyone who is affected by MSP in the process. So it's actually these methods to assess these impacts can provide a tool to engage people and to organize these participatory approaches. So that's also good to keep in mind. As we saw in Mari's presentation and also highlighted by me, that many of these assessments are based on citizens' perspectives, views, and values. So it's one of the ways to engage citizens and local people to these processes.
Yes, and thank you. This is somehow where I can just tie in and also refer to the morning session number 2 on participation and participatory methods, because in principle this is where things go together, where you have to start thinking about the process and thinking about the institutions. And one other thing that is always coming back to me in these discussions is that we are not just talking marine spatial planning, we're talking integrated coastal zone management, and spatial planning is just a part of it, and space and we people, users, nature in the landscape is a very important perspective, and it's maybe not only planning, but there has to be some kind of a interaction going on between the different systems and between the different sectors, and that the fishermen are not standing there and saying, okay, we have this common fisheries policy, why can't you marine spatial planners do anything about that? Or a local level government saying, yeah, but what is marine spatial planning? How can we connect to this? So there's like these questions where we have, okay, we have methods and data, but we also need to think about the overall system and the overall process. And in that sense, I would like to connect to Susanne and ask her whether she has any kind of really wrapping up ideas that have like come into your face, because you're a planner too.
Yeah.
What is like your final reflection on that?
I don't know if I really I like the thought of the socio-economic aspects being very important to MSP, and to very much you take that into account when you do a lot of work. And I have always been of the opinion that LSI is nothing new. So I understand your point of view there. It has been part of Swedish law since the 80s. So I mean, maybe it hasn't been performed perfectly, but it's been there, so it's not new. So yeah, it's an important part. That's
it's
all
more how
say.
to get it done, and how to get the capacity and the resources and the people to actually do it, and make that kind of process and make these kinds of institutional adaptations to really to make systems work together, that we have now identified in several discussions, I think also in this workshop and in other workshops.
Right.
Okay.
Should we do the
I shall
fun
do
bit
the
again?
thanking. So I would now like to thank the speakers, including myself, the panelists, very much for the good discussions, and the audience as well. Thank you for contributing, for coming this late hour, and it's been really interesting for us, hopefully for you too. Thank you.
You want to say something about the thing on the screen?
Okay. I will just...
So now.
The evening reception, the fun stuff begins.
Yes, so head to the National Library of Latvia, very close, for the reception.
It's the house that looks like a mountain.
And have a look at the house inside, it's really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you later.